As the sun rises up on high, and my eyes look to the sky.
We go over to the UK for a conversation with Issa Darby. His book is called Worlds of Jinn. What I like about what his book does, it's what I call excellent reverse engineering, where you take something historical and then it's fantasy where it's wrapped in that. So your mind, I think, can paint some pretty vivid pictures. And to me, this is just me, for everybody listening, and all of you know me, it's about that. It's about feeling like I'm in it. And I think that that is the key thing to Issa's book, Worlds of Jinn. Issa, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Kate, for inviting me.
Did you do that intentionally? Did you think, like what I just said, that, hey, I love the idea of this setup of taking history, then wrapping it around fantasy?
I did. I think you put it better than I could have there. The way you explained it then was excellent. Yes, I wanted to write a fantasy novel, but I didn't want it to be pure fantasy. I wanted it to have some bearing in the real world so that people can relate to it. Even if it's back in history, people can still relate to it because there's an element of reality there.
Yeah. And, you know, you're taking us back in history to the Crusades, which is interesting because people are fascinated by the Crusades. We're seeing Hollywood is consistently making movies about it. Even now and before, and every decade we see that. So I think that really kind of pulls us into this. So tell us about Worlds of Jinn. Give us kind of a little thumbnail. We're not going to give away all the details of what we can expect when we crack open your novel.
Essentially, it's a book about, I've picked a particular historical period. It's the Third Crusade. The Christians are occupying the small town of Acre. They've been pushed out of Jerusalem. The Muslims are occupying Jerusalem itself. And there is tension between the two sides, but there's also a very fragile peace just about being held together between the two sides. So I thought, well, what if there's a third party that wants to disrupt this fragile peace in order to create tension, in order to perhaps take over themselves? And then the fantasy element came in. What if these people are working with beings from other worlds? The Arabs call them Jinn. In English, that's genies. But the Jinn can encompass all sorts of creatures. So then I started bringing in creatures from other mythologies and simply using them as a form of Jinn. And so I thought, well, these people are working with those Jinn. In order to stop them, the others, the ones that are holding this fragile piece together, would have to also work with Jinn in order to not be overwhelmed by the superior force. That's how it began. And then it expanded from there as I thought more and more about it.
Wow. I'm just thinking in my head, you know, as I said, you paint these great pictures, that if you and I were sitting in a coffee shop, what kind of Jinn would be flying around us with these creatures? And I know you have a prince that's a main character. So tell us about one of the creatures, because I think that's fascinating.
He's probably another main character, and he comes in reasonably early in the book, and that is Zenith, who is a very high-powered Jinn working with Jawad against the forces of evil or the forces of darkness, whatever you like to call them. And he's in what I've done in the book is now I've looked at this is going to sound really strange, but I looked at the biblical idea of Satan and the Islamic idea of Satan. The Bible says that Satan was an angel who was cast down. The Quran says Satan was a jinn who was cast down. But it also gives the impression that Satan was among the angels. So what I thought is, well, what if some jinn were promoted to the position of angel? So they were in essence angels, but also jinn. And what if Satan was one of those? What if Zenith is also one of those? But he's on the good side, whereas Satan is on the bad side. And so Zenith becomes quite an important character in the book as well, from the jinn perspective. Zenith,
I love it. This book, Worlds of Jinn, which you can get on Amazon and wherever great books are sold, of course.
Yeah.
What do you hope people take away from reading your book? So someone hears our conversation or someone finds out about your book and they say, you know what, I'm going to, and you and I are both voracious readers, so we understand the importance of, picking a book and getting lost in it. What do you hope the reader takes away from picking up Worlds of Jinn?
Well, when I read books, the books that really capture me are the ones where I go away thinking, or I go to my wife and I say, wow, there's a great piece in this book. This piece here really made me think. An example would be David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. There are bits and pieces throughout that book where I'd stop and actually put a marker in the page and go, I want to read that out loud to my wife, because what he said there has really made me think. And hopefully that there are elements of my book that will also make people think, oh, that had never occurred to me, or that was an interesting point. So in addition to the story, maybe I'm hoping that people will take more than just the story, that there are some messages throughout the book as well.
Yes, and definitely it's there are messages. There are what I call like sort of mileposts in your writing. But you're not done. You're not done with just Worlds of Jinn. You are right now working on a sequel. How's that going?
Yeah, I've started it. I'm maybe 6 chapters in, but since retiring, I've worked in a number of jobs over the years. My last period of work was 16 or 17 years of working in education. But before that, years ago, back in the 80s, I worked for Cat Stevens and in the music business. Everything's been under pressure. And since retiring, I'm finding it very, very nice to not have to do anything. And I think one problem I've got with the sequel is I'm not under any deadlines, and I like playing computer games. I like watching Netflix, and I love listening to music and doing other things. So it's progressing, but it's progressing slowly.
That's a great answer. I love it. Issa Darby, you are a delight. The book, Worlds of Jinn, I love it. That reverse engineering that I talked about in the beginning of this conversation. Again, you can pick it up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or again, wherever great books are sold. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, you have to love it. Worlds of Jinn, and what an interesting guy. When we talk about doing other things, how the music, I think, influences that whole creative flow. And Issa Darby and his group, the group that he's with, the Cynical Renegade. I mean, does it get any better than that? They've got a fan page that you can actually go to, or if you check out the Cynical Renegade fan group on Facebook, I guess that's the best place to go. You can hear some more of that music and get some of that music, because I think it's quite good, actually. Since our conversation, I've talked to a few people and turned them on to his work, not just his book, Worlds of Jinn, but also the fact that he plays, and you can tell his story about when he was just a kid and running into Cat Stevens, and then how that moved forward and led to this interesting odyssey at such a young age, and it's never done. And I think that's it's interesting. I think it's part of who he is, and I think it's part of the miracle of creativity. When you have that creativity that flows through you, I think it extends in so many other directions, and he's a great example of that. And whether it's the music or the book that we just talked about, boy, how interesting does it get. When the world opens back up, I hope to be somewhere sitting in a pub or a bigger place and listening to Isa and the rest of the guys from Cynical Renegade. And thanks to all of you for listening to this interview and this version of the show. Remember, make it count, everybody.